The Lancaster Hotel in Mayfair glittered like a temple to wealth. Crystal chandeliers rained light over marble floors, and 100 champagne flutes sparkled as if each drop of gold liquid carried the promise of power. It was the kind of place where families like mine, families that believed money could buy elegance, forgiveness, even loyalty, came to remind the world of their superiority. I should not have been there. At least, not according to them. Why is this failure here? My mother's voice, Eleanor Hayes, cut through the ballroom like the blade of a saber. Sharp, deliberate, designed to wound. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. The laughter of London's elite stuttered into silence as her disgust rippled across the room. 100 eyes followed the trajectory of her scorn until they landed on me. Alexandra Hayes. The erased daughter. For a moment, even the music paused. The string quartet stumbled, regained composure, and played on, but the shift had already happened. The air itself thickened. Near the champagne fountain, my younger sister Victoria crossed her arms, lips twisting into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. She wore her wedding gown like a crown, lace spilling across the polished floor, diamonds catching every beam of light as though they too bowed before her. "You're not on the guest list," she said, her voice pitched just high enough for whispers to spread like wildfire. "This is a private event." Across the room, my father Charles Hayes didn't so much as flinch. He didn't acknowledge me. He didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks and took a measured sip of champagne, posture rigid, gaze fixed on anything but me. I expected nothing less. I let the moment stretch. One slow step forward. My heels struck the marble with the clarity of a countdown, each click reverberating against the gilded walls. A declaration. A warning. The Lancaster Hotel was built for people like them. Not for the abandoned. Not for the erased. But tonight, I was not simply present. Tonight, I owned the moment. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. I could feel it in the way their glasses tilted midair, their bodies angling subtly toward me. They didn't yet know who I was, but they sensed the storm gathering. And then, the first real crack in their perfect facade. Not from my mother. Not from Victoria. But from James Whitmore. Victoria's fiancé. His smirk vanished in an instant. His body went rigid. His fingers twitched against the stem of his glass, his throat bobbing with a swallow thick enough to echo in the silence. And then, fear. He looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Interesting. I tilted my head, allowing the silence to stretch until it strained. Until it cut. Let them feel it, the weight of what was coming. Finally, with quiet, deliberate control, I spoke. "Do you really not know who I am?" The ballroom reacted as if a current had passed through it. Whispers fractured conversations. Silk rustled against polished floors. Curious eyes widened. My mother's grip tightened around her glass. Victoria's flawless confidence flickered for the barest second. They expected me to cower. To shrink back into the girl they had discarded. Instead, I smiled. Slow. Deliberate. A blade sliding free of its sheath. "My name is Alexandra Hayes." The words fell heavy, undeniable. And just like that, their perfect world began to crack. The past clawed its way into the present with every breath I took. I could still feel the cold of that night, the night I had been discarded like unwanted debris. I was 16. The Hayes estate stood behind me, its Georgian facade lit by golden lamps, each window a reminder of warmth I was no longer welcome in. Charles Hayes, my father, stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face carved into stone. Behind him, Eleanor didn't even glance at me. She sipped her wine, staring past me as though I were already a shadow. And Victoria, my younger sister, the golden child, stood wrapped in warmth and silk, smirking as though my expulsion were a private joke. "You're a burden," my mother had said, her voice cool, detached, slicing me open with precision. "A waste of time. A waste of money." I wanted to scream. To plead. But my father cut across the silence with finality. "No excuses, Alexandra. You're an adult. Figure it out." Then the door shut. Just like that, I was erased. I remember staring at the wood, waiting for it to open again. Waiting for someone, anyone, to come after me. No one did. The winter wind howled through the empty streets of Hampstead, biting at my skin as I clutched a too-thin coat around me. My world reduced to the £14.80 in my pocket and the clothes on my back. 3 nights, I slept behind Martha Collins's diner on Soho's corner, curled against the dumpsters where the heat from the kitchen vents barely kept me alive. Hunger gnawed, exhaustion dragged my limbs like lead, but I refused to break. On the 4th morning, she found me. "If you're going to loiter, you might as well make yourself useful," Martha had said, tossing a broom at my feet. That broom was my first lifeline. The memory dissolved, replaced by the sharp opulence of the ballroom. My mother's eyes burned with rage, but she said nothing. Victoria tilted her chin, lips twisting. James shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading at his temple. I let the silence coil tighter. The stage was set. Victoria recovered first. Of course she did. The Golden Child had never been without an audience, and tonight was her masterpiece. She adjusted the diamond bracelet at her wrist, lifted her chin, and let out a laugh loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "God, Alexandra," she sneered, "you just had to show up and embarrass yourself, didn't you?" Still desperate for attention. A ripple of amusement passed through some of the younger guests, her friends, her allies, her pawns, but I noticed their smiles faltered as they glanced back at me. I didn't flinch. Instead, I allowed a smile to curl at the edges of my lips, slow, deliberate, unnerving. "Oh," I murmured, tilting my head. "Is that what they told you?" For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty passed through her expression. I reached into my emerald clutch. Not hurriedly, not desperately, but with the calm precision of someone who knew the weight of what she carried. From within, I drew out a folded sheet of ivory paper. The sound of it unfurling sliced through the murmurs like a warning bell. Victoria's smirk faltered. I held the paper high enough for James to see. His eyes scanned the words, and in the space of 3 heartbeats, his face drained of color. "What is this?" His voice was quiet but jagged, dangerous. "It's your fiancé's academic record," I said, my tone smooth as silk. "The one that proves she never finished medical school." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Whispers escalated into pointed murmurs. Heads turned. A scandal was blooming, and the ballroom was ravenous for it. James's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the stem of his glass, then let it go entirely, as though it burned him. "Victoria," he said slowly, each syllable weighted like a stone, "tell me this isn't true." Her eyes darted wildly between him and me, her confidence slipping like silk unraveling. Then, laughter. Loud, sharp, brittle. "This is pathetic," she scoffed, tossing her head back. "She shows up here, waves around some fake paper, and thinks she can ruin my wedding? Honestly, Alexandra, I should be flattered. It's obvious you're jealous. Look at me." She spread her arms, displaying the gown, the jewels, the family crest embroidered into her veil. "Look at my life. I have everything you don't. A successful fiancé. A loving family. A future you could only dream of." I stepped closer. Slowly. Calmly. Each click of my heels ricocheted off marble and echoed like a gavel. "If I'm so irrelevant," I murmured, my gaze locking with hers, "why do you look so nervous?" Her smirk flickered. Just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. And so did James. His grip tightened around the paper, his eyes blazing with something I recognized all too well, betrayal. "Enough." My mother's voice cut through the room, brittle and clipped, the voice of a woman who had spent decades controlling every social narrative, every whispered rumor, every careful arrangement. She stepped forward now, immaculate in navy silk, her diamond earrings catching the light like weapons. "I will not let you ruin your sister's wedding with these absurd accusations," Eleanor Hayes said coldly. "This stops now." I turned to her. Met her gaze head-on. "Oh, Eleanor," I said softly, smiling just enough for the edges to sting. "You should know by now, I don't make accusations. I present facts." And with that, I reached once more into my clutch. This time, it wasn't paper. It was a sleek, black USB drive. I held it lightly between 2 fingers, as though it were no more consequential than a trinket. Yet the silence that fell was absolute. "Shall we talk?" I said, my voice casual, conversational, about the financial fraud at the Hayes Medical Center. Dead silence. Charles Hayes, my father, stiffened. His jaw twitched, his hand frozen around his champagne glass. A ripple moved through the guests like wind through dry grass. "You're bluffing," Eleanor said, though her voice lacked its usual steel. I tilted my head. "Am I?" I twirled the USB drive slowly, watching the light catch its surface. Bank statements. Emails. Legal documents. Years of fraudulent insurance claims. All signed under the proud Hayes name. Sophisticated murmurs erupted into audible gasps. Names were whispered: Hayes, fraud, scandal. I saw Professor Howard step forward, his face crimson with rage. The director of the Hayes Medical Center. His voice thundered, cutting through the chaos. "You told me," he snapped at Charles, his fists trembling, "that your daughter's credentials were legitimate. You vouched for her." James turned sharply toward Victoria. His eyes no longer held confusion, only anger. "Tell me," he demanded again, his voice dangerously calm. "Is this true?" She laughed again, too quickly this time, brittle, fraying. "Oh my God, James, you're actually believing her. She's lying. She's twisted everything to make herself look important." "Lies." I cut in smoothly. Interesting choice of word. I let the silence drip like poison. Then I added, softly, lethally, "Because I have more." The ballroom was a storm now, murmurs rising into chaos, elegance unraveling thread by thread. Eleanor's mask of control began to slip. Charles paled, beads of sweat breaking across his temples. James Whitmore, still clutching the paper, stared at Victoria as though seeing her for the first time. Finally, his voice broke the room. "I defended you," he said quietly, his voice splintering. "I trusted you. And the whole time he cut himself off with a bitter laugh. "You were nothing but a lie." He pulled the engagement ring from his finger, held it for a single, damning second, then hurled it at her feet. The metallic clink of diamond against marble echoed like a verdict. Victoria gasped, reaching for him with desperate fingers. "James." "Don't," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Don't touch me." Eleanor lunged forward then, her composure cracking. "James, sweetheart, please. Don't let one mistake ruin everything. You and Victoria are meant to be together." But James only shook his head, his face carved into stone. "You don't get it," he said, his tone low, final. "It's not one mistake. It's everything. Every lie. Every fraud. Every word out of your mouths." His eyes lifted to me then. She was right. The room stilled. For the first time in years, my mother looked speechless. And I wasn't finished. I let the moment stretch until the silence quivered. Then, with calm precision, I dropped the final match. "You've been using my identity for tax fraud for the past decade." The room erupted. Margaret's, or rather Eleanor's, gasp split the air. Charles staggered back, his complexion ghostly white. Guests whispered furiously, their scandalous murmurs rising like flames. "That's a lie." Charles snarled, his voice trembling. "Is it?" I asked softly, producing a second USB drive. Imagine my surprise when I discovered fraudulent returns filed under my name. All signed, all traced, all linked to the Hayes Medical Center. Professor Howard turned, his voice snapping like a whip. "Call the legal department. Now." Security surged forward. Guests gasped, their diamond-clad fingers covering painted lips. Eleanor clutched at Charles, but even her steel couldn't mask the panic crawling across her face. Their empire was cracking. Right there, under the glittering chandeliers of the Lancaster Hotel. And for the first time in my life, I saw them exactly as they were, small. The Lancaster Hotel ballroom, once a shrine to elegance, was now a theater of collapse. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their jewels glinting as they leaned together in whispered urgency. The quartet had stopped playing entirely. The silence was filled instead with gasps, shuffling feet, the occasional clink of a glass nervously set down too hard. Charles Hayes looked as though the ground had vanished beneath him. His complexion was ash-grey, his hand trembling against the back of a gilded chair. Beside him, Eleanor's carefully painted mask cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her nostrils flared, and for the first time in her life, she seemed cornered. Security had stepped closer, discreet but unmistakable, their dark suits cutting through the crowd. Professor Howard spoke into his phone in low, furious tones, every syllable heavy with consequence. And Victoria. She was on her knees. Her wedding gown pulled around her like a fallen crown, lace spread across marble now scuffed by desperation. Her perfectly manicured hands clawed at James's arm, but he shook her off, his jaw hard, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond her. The ring he had hurled lay on the floor between them, glittering under the chandelier like a symbol of everything lost. The golden child was unraveling. "Alexandra, please," her voice broke, her eyes wide, frantic. "Don't do this. You don't understand." I tilted my head. "Calm. Composed." "No, Victoria," I said softly. "For the first time, I understand everything." She let out a sob, her lips trembling. "You're my sister." The word rang false. A shard of glass pressed against an old wound. "Sister." I repeated, my voice quiet but lethal. "The night you stood behind that door, smiling while they threw me out into the cold, was I your sister then?" Her breath caught. Gasps rippled through the guests, many of whom had been allies, friends, donors to the Hayes family legacy. Now, they watched with something close to hunger, waiting for the empire to fall, eager to claim pieces for themselves. Eleanor snapped back into action. She seized her champagne glass, her hand trembling only slightly, and raised her voice above the chaos. "This is madness," she declared, her tone clipped, commanding. "My daughter is a liar, and this spectacle is beneath us. Alexandra has always been unstable. It's no wonder she was estranged. You should all ignore her." The dismissal was sharp. Practiced. The kind of line she had wielded all her life to erase problems before they could bloom. But tonight, it landed on deaf ears. Because for once, she had no control. I stepped forward, the click of my heels punctuating every syllable. "Unstable?" I asked, my tone almost amused. "You're right about one thing, Eleanor. I was unstable once. The night you left me to freeze with nothing but £14 in my pocket. I was unstable when I scrubbed floors until my hands bled. I was unstable when I starved myself to save enough for textbooks." I paused. The silence was suffocating. "But I am not unstable now. I am powerful. And you," I turned my gaze slowly across the family who had discarded me, fixing on each of them in turn. "You are finished." The final word echoed like a gavel. Charles lunged then, his composure shattering. "You think you're better than us?" he roared, his voice cracking, spit flying in the heat of his desperation. "You think one little company makes you more than the family that made you?" Security intercepted before he could get close. Two men in tailored black suits gripped his arms firmly, their voices low but unyielding as they urged him back. He struggled, his face red, veins rising in his temples. "I made you." Charles spat, his words splintering under the weight of humiliation. "Everything you are is because of me." I met his wild eyes, tilting my head ever so slightly. "I don't have to think I'm better," I said softly. "I know it." The words landed like a blow. Charles sagged, his fury dissolving into something more dangerous. Fear. Eleanor's grip on her glass tightened so hard the stem snapped, shards scattering onto the floor with a crystalline scream. Blood welled along her palm, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were locked on me, wide, disbelieving, as though she had finally realized she was losing. "Take them out," Professor Howard ordered sharply, gesturing to security. The command snapped the final thread. Gasps rippled as Charles was restrained and led toward the exit, his protests spilling into incoherent rants. Eleanor stumbled after him, her perfect navy gown sweeping the shards of glass in her wake, her voice rising, desperate now, stripped of all elegance. "You'll regret this, Alexandra," she cried, her voice ragged. "We made you. You're nothing without us." But the guests weren't listening. They were whispering, watching, judging. The once untouchable Hayes family were reduced to spectacle. Victoria remained on the floor, sobbing, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. James stood above her, expression carved from granite, as though every moment of his engagement had been a lie. I crouched slightly, not enough to get close, but just enough to let my words fall directly into her crumbling world. "You never cared about me," I said softly. "And now, Victoria, I don't care about you." Her sobs broke into a scream, sharp and raw, but I didn't flinch. I stood, turned, and walked past her. Past the shattered ring. Past the broken stem of Eleanor's glass. Past the murmuring crowd who parted like water before me. Every step was liberation. Outside, the cold London night wrapped around me like an embrace. The city hummed beyond the hotel's glowing facade. Black cabs gliding down Park Lane, the faint buzz of Piccadilly lights in the distance, the crisp bite of winter air. And he was waiting. Daniel Reed leaned casually against the sleek black car parked at the curb. His dark eyes tracked me, assessing without judgment. He didn't ask if I was all right. He didn't need to. Instead, his lips twitched, a flicker of humor breaking through the weight of the night. "So," he said quietly, "cake?" I blinked. Startled. And then, unexpectedly, laughter spilled out of me. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't felt in years. "Yes," I said, still grinning. "Cake." Because revenge wasn't the point. Freedom was. And tonight, at last, I was free. The headlines came quickly. By dawn, every paper in London was carrying some variation of the same story. Hayes family empire collapses amid fraud allegations. Photographs from the Lancaster Hotel flooded the tabloids. Victoria on her knees in her ruined wedding gown, Eleanor's blooded hand clutching the broken stem of a champagne glass, Charles being escorted from the ballroom by security. The family that had once ruled Harley Street with quiet authority was reduced overnight to scandal and disgrace. I didn't read the articles. I didn't need to. For years, I had dreamed of the moment they would finally face consequences. And when it came, I realized something I hadn't expected. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. I moved out of my Canary Wharf penthouse 2 weeks later. It was everything they would have wanted for me. Glass walls, sweeping views of the Thames, a place to parade success. But it was never mine. It had been built as proof. Proof that I was more than the girl they abandoned. Proof that I belonged in their world. And I no longer needed proof. So I sold it. With the money, I bought a townhouse in Chelsea. Smaller, quieter, tucked away behind a wrought iron gate and ivy climbing across cream-colored brick. The kind of house where no one cared who your parents were, or whether you were on the guest list. It was mine. Entirely mine. I opened a cafe bookshop on the ground floor. A dream I had carried since those long nights studying in borrowed libraries and saving pennies for stale coffee. Hayes and Reed. Not a legacy to the family who had discarded me. A beginning with Daniel. The cafe smelled of espresso and old paper, the kind of combination that made people linger. Students from King's College huddled over laptops. Retirees browsed shelves of poetry. Lawyers from the Inns of Court stopped by in the evenings for a whiskey in the back lounge. I hired staff others overlooked, people with scars, with histories, with stories of rejection that mirrored my own. They were loyal not because I demanded it, but because I saw them. Really saw them. Every morning, as I unlocked the front door and the little bell above chimed, I felt it again, freedom. The Hayes family disappeared from public life. Charles lost his medical license within months. Their clinic shut down, its name stripped from the brass plate on Harley Street. Eleanor retreated to a villa in the Cotswolds, seen only at charity galas where she still tried to smile for cameras that no longer cared. Victoria. I heard whispers. That she tried to move to New York, that James Whitmore cut her off completely, that she filed for bankruptcy under her married name even though the marriage had never taken place. I didn't follow closely. She was no longer my story. They had written me out of theirs years ago. I had finally learned to do the same. Daniel and I celebrated my 35th birthday in the cafe, after hours. The shelves were draped with fairy lights, the staff had left handwritten notes tucked between books, and there was cake, Chocolate, of course. He handed me a small box, not a ring, but a silver key. To the flat upstairs, he said softly. If you want me here. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. And for the first time in my life, I said yes without hesitation. Some nights, I still dreamt of the cold. The door slamming shut. The silence on the other side. But when I woke, I didn't feel the ache of rejection anymore. I felt gratitude. Because if they hadn't abandoned me, I might never have discovered what I was capable of. I might never have learned that family is not defined by blood or names on a crest, but by the people who stand with you when the world turns away. Martha Collins, the diner owner who gave me a cot. The professors who believed in my work. The colleagues who followed me when I launched my company. Daniel, steady and unflinching. That was my family. On the anniversary of the Lancaster Hotel debacle, I walked past the building. The chandeliers still glittered, the marble still gleamed, the wealthy still gathered in gowns and tuxedos. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. Because this time, I didn't feel small when I saw the grand facade. I didn't feel the urge to prove myself. I felt nothing at all. And that was freedom. Years later, when my bookshop had expanded to 3 locations and Hayes and Reed had become a quiet landmark in London, a journalist asked me the question I had spent half my life preparing to answer. Do you regret what you did to your family? I smiled, the kind of smile that carried both pain and peace. They made their choices, I said. And I made mine. They chose to abandon me. I chose to survive. They chose lies. I chose truth. I don't regret my choices. The journalist pressed. But you destroyed them. I shook my head. No, I said simply. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped protecting them from it. The cafe closed late that night. Daniel and I sat on the balcony above, looking out over Chelsea rooftops. The city hummed, alive and indifferent, just as it had been the night they cast me out. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one, and raised his in a quiet toast. To freedom, he said. I clinked my glass against his, the sound sharp and clear in the night air. To freedom, I echoed. And for the first time, I knew it wasn't fragile. It was mine. Forever.